This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports, continuing progress on the 496 FE. Hopefully we'll get the majority of this thing buttoned up this weekend. I think I left you last time. I went ahead and cut the end rails off the intake. I just didn't have enough clearance to be comfortable with after I got the bolts snugged up, and it's just another thing that you need to mock up before you bolt the intake down solid. So with that being done, I'm going to get the intake off, and I'll show how I apply the silicone, and we'll get this intake bolted on and go on to the next step. So if you remember from the last video, just a few comments before I pause. Go ahead and have all your bolts mocked up and make sure that they're the right length. They vary from intake to intake, and you don't want to be in the middle of bolting this thing down and find out that the bolt is too long or too short. So let me get the intake off, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, what I like to do is just put just a very thin layer of silicone. I use Dow Corning 732 clear, and just a thin layer around each port and each water jacket. And then I will run a bead starting here and go all the way across. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you force it down into this little crotch area here where the head meets the block. And that's pretty important that you get it down in there. All right, set the intake on. Intake is on. I've got some lubricant on all my bolts, and the bolts are started. Got the distributor in and centered, and that makes sure that the intake is located in the right spot. And then you just tighten down the bolts to sequence, and you can look that up on the internet. Pretty easily available, but you need to follow the pattern that's laid out for FEs. All right, we got our intake bolted down solid, and we doing a few other things here in the next few seconds. I'm gonna go ahead and tape this off, put our carb studs on with our lift plate, get all this covered up so that we don't accidentally drop anything down in the plenum. But here's how clean your silicone should be set up. A long time ago I heard someone tell some young girls about putting makeup on, and they said, the key to putting makeup on is to make it look like you're not wearing makeup. Other words, keep everything to a minimum. And same thing with these engines. If you got a big old fat bead hanging out somewhere, it looks sloppy, and you want to try to get away from that. So everything's trimmed off nice and neat, and that's the way you want it to look. So we're gonna tape this off, carb studs on, lift plate on. We're gonna go ahead and put all of our fittings in our water ports, and then we'll get our push rods and rocker arms on. Okay, carb plate is on. All of our water vacuum fittings are in. Nipple for our water pump bypass. Gaskets trimmed off at the valve cover rail. And what we're gonna do now is go back and look at our push rod length map that we laid out a video or so ago. And we're gonna put some assembly lube on each end of our push rod and get those push rods in there and get ready to put our rocker arms on. Okay, here's a very important step. When you put the push rods in, I would suggest that you look down the tube and make sure that the push rod is seated in the lifter cup, because you can toss these things in there and they don't always go where they're supposed to go. So take a quick glance at all those, and I've got a couple to fix here. You can see this one's all whopper jawed. This is very important, and especially on some flat tappet lifters where the cup doesn't necessarily sit much lower than the outside rim of the lifter. What can happen is your push rod goes down and it doesn't go in the cup, and all of a sudden when you roll your motor over, you've got you know, an 1/8 inch more valve lift than you thought you had before, which can cause some problems. So go through here, check all this out, and then what I'm going to do after I do that, I'm going to go back and put assembly lube on each push rod tip and each valve tip, and then lay my rocker arms down. All lubed up, and let's see here. Let's see if I can get a good view of the push rods. You can see how, like, this lifter is up. These two are kind of up. You really get a good shot here. This one's up, that one's down. You want to get away from that before you put your rocker arms on. Remember the other video, you know, we spoke about not loading the shaft, the rocker arm shaft, more than you absolutely have to. So I'm going to roll the engine over, and I'm going to put these rockers on first, but I want to make sure that all the push rods are pretty much down as far as they'll go before they get bolted on. I've applied some oil to the threads and to where the nuts want to sit. We're going to go through and put our washers on. I'm going to drop one on the floor. And this stud is usually short because it goes down in the oil feed hole. And it usually doesn't have enough length to use a washer, but the nuts are flanged, so it doesn't bother me. And some other applications, sometimes you get different lengths, and I leave the washers off altogether. And once you got all your washers and nuts on, what I would suggest is just grab a wrench, and when you tighten down, you can see how this guy is not in there yet. Just when you tighten everything down, go a quarter turn at a time. Just go slow. Make sure all the push rods go into the cups, and then when you get all your rocker or all the stands down against the head, then you can go back and torque. And you can look at your instructions for your studs and get a torque spec and just torque them down evenly. Edelbrock water pump gets bolted on. If you're pre-cutting your bypass hose, these usually go at about 2 3/8 of an inch length. You can cut that off and slip that on there. BBM blocks, you don't have to worry about this one hitting water, but if you're working with a factory block, this water pump bolt will hit water, so use some silicone on that. Next step is to get the distributor cap, plugs, and wires on, and valve covers. We're getting close to buttoning this thing up. A quick tip, if you are getting ready to start the engine for the first time, the oil pump is primed, and you're getting ready to light it off, it's important that you drop the distributor in a spot where it'll start immediately, especially if you have a flat tappet cam. You don't want it to crank and crank and crank until it starts. So here's a quick tip on how to get this going quickly. This is the exhaust valve. You want to roll the engine over until this valve opens and then closes, and when it's starting to close, you'll see the intake valve also start to open. And when it's starting to close, you want to be looking at your harmonic balancer and your pointer keep rolling the engine over, and the intake valve will shut, and then you want to roll over till about 30 degrees. So you're at 30 degrees before top dead center. You're giving it plenty of lead advance to start. And then when you drop your distributor in, you want your rotor pointing at your #1 plug wire. So if there's fuel in the carburetor, if your distributor is hooked up, then I promise you the engine will fire immediately. So quick tip on first engine start. All right, a few more things to do here. All right, here's what we got going on. Pretty much done. I got to put the valve cover breathers in. Just looked on the shelf and I'm out of breathers, so I'm gonna have to order some. But everything else is pretty much taken care of. So I'm gonna try to get this dynoed in the next week or two. Probably will not be next week, but maybe the week after that. I'll have to see how schedules flow and how my buddy's dyno schedule is. I will for sure have videos of the dyno and the results. This is going to be a stout little motor, but I'll make sure and post all the results on another video. In the meantime, I will be starting another build pretty soon, a 428 from, be a period correct 428 for a Shelby Cobra replica. Most guys don't know that some 427 Shelby Cobra cars came with 428s, and going to be starting one of those pretty soon with all factory parts. Pretty much a pretty I wouldn't say concours, but period correct, down to a police interceptor intake and the correct cylinder heads and block and everything else. So that, and I have a 465 cubic inch tunnel port motor getting ready to start. So you'll be seeing a lot more videos, and I urge you to hit the like button and subscribe so you can see all these videos coming up. And I appreciate you sitting here and listening and watching. And if you have any suggestions for anything else you want to see coming up, I'll be more than happy to look at those and do my best to help you out with that. So have a good weekend. This is Brent, Lykins Motorsports, signing off.